Thank you, Peggy. So hydrangeas are some of my very favorite shrubs, so I am very pleased to be able to bring this information to you today. And we'll be talking about a number of different species. So we'll start out by talking about some generalities. I know this slide is kind of a wall of text, but I kind of wanted to set the stage a little bit. First of all, we're only going to be talking about 5 species because there are only 5 that are reliably hardy in different areas of Wisconsin. Things they have in common, these 5 species, are that all need good soil moisture and definitely should be watered during dry periods. They are less successful often on sandy soils, but even though that is the case, they still need good drainage on the moist soils that they're in. In other words, they don't like boggy situations either. All of them do like good organic matter content, so good nutrition of those soils. And at some point, all of them need to be deadheaded, except for possibly the vine, because it's too far up in the air for you to do that. If you do like collecting the dried blossoms, you can keep those on over winter. If you prefer to leave them on for winter interest, that is fine. Unfortunately, a lot of these species are not hardy all the way through the state, and some of them are marginally hardy where they are hardy. And a number of them are leaf bud hardy, but not reliably flower bud hardy. So if you've had the sad experience of planting a hydrangea, particularly one that flowers blue or pink, and the first couple of years you got flowers, but not thereafter, that may be what's going on in that particular case. Some of these species need more sun and others need more shade, and we'll go through that as we go through the different species. And then a question that I often get is about flower color. And this is the case that some of them have their flower color affected by soil pH, which is a measure of soil alkalinity and acidity, and others that does not affect their flower color. So this is a brief outline. We'll start by talking about hardiness, since I've kind of mentioned that's really important. Different aspects of winter hardiness to help you understand whether your site may or may not be suited. Soils and soil pH, soil testing, pruning techniques, and then finally the actual species. So we'll start out by talking about hardiness zones. You may have seen this map before. This is from the USDA. These are 5-degree increments that are typically the lowest range of temperatures that a particular area is likely to experience. So take a look at this map and kind of figure out where you are located. Now, this is not the most recent map. I'm using this map because, well, actually, I think it is a little bit more accurate. Like in Dane County, I can tell you for sure that areas outside the main city of Madison are in zone 4B, even though our most recent map says they are in 5A. My brother lives in Blue Mounds, which is in a valley area. The western part of the state is very hilly and unglaciated. So rural areas, areas that have low topography, often will experience lower winter temperatures. But it's not just the temperatures that are a problem. It could be that you experience the thing that I mentioned where flowers or hydrangeas that flower in what we call old wood, where the flower buds are produced the season before, so they must go through the winter and survive in order to bloom next year, just like you would with a lilac, for example. If those flower buds are not winter hardy, then you won't get flowers produced. But there are also hydrangeas that flower on new wood. So that really impacts the time of year that you can prune and the type of pruning that you need to do. And as I mentioned, temperature is only one element of winter hardiness. It's also how long the duration of the cold was. So if you dip into -20 for a night versus a whole week, that makes a big difference. Whether or not we have snow cover. So especially for some of the lower growing hydrangeas, you may find that they flower more below the snow line if they are ones that have marginally hardy flower buds. And the fall conditions. If we had a very dry fall, that can impact flower bud survival over winter. And if we've also had a very wet fall, sometimes that can influence things too. A lot of these hydrangeas don't like wet, soggy soil around their root systems. So they can be impacted by heavy soil and by things like rain on top of snow that causes ice to puddle around the stems. And then finally, soil type. If you have a sandy soil, a lot of these plants would need to have the soil amended and amended probably every year with a little bit of organic matter, and also need a lot more supplemental water. If you have super heavy clay, that may be hard on them since they don't like poor drainage. They're looking for something kind of in that Goldilocks zone in between. And we have over 700 types of soils throughout Wisconsin. So that's going to affect the flower color of some of these plants, and again, the drainage characteristics as well. So if you had an ideal soil, you would have 25% of it be air pockets, 25% water, 5% organic matter, 45% minerals. If you have a compacted soil, that's going to affect how your plant is able to grow because the roots can't penetrate very well and they may get into anaerobic conditions. It also, you have to worry about nutrient supply and pH, which we will talk about now. That is a measure of soil alkalinity and acidity. And the reason why that matters is because some nutrients are more available at the middle of the range, and you can see the scale goes from 1 to 14, starting at the acidic end, neutral in the middle, alkaline at the top. If you live in the lower half of the state, your soils are likely to be alkaline. Therefore, it is hard for you to get your flowers to turn blue. And you probably need to add sulfur type products in order for that to happen. And if your soils are up in the 7 to 8 range, no matter how much sulfur you add, you're going to be fighting Mother Nature all the way. So it makes it not only difficult to get that blue color, but also some of these nutrients you can see when they're really small like this at the pointy ends, they are less available. So if your soils are somewhere, 6, 7.5, you can still grow these species, but probably not get blue flowers. For blue flowers, you need something around 5.5 to 6. If you're wondering ahead of time what your soils are like, you might want to get a soil test. That will tell you what your pH is, also give you an idea of how much organic matter you have, and other handy things that you need to know. And you'll find some forms on the site that tell you how to take the sample and also how to fill it out, so that the other form, so that they know what you're growing and what kind of recommendations you are looking for. Next, pruning techniques. I often get questions, Lisa, how do I prune my hydrangeas? My answer is, well, what kind of hydrangea do you have? And then the answer back is often something like, So what we're going to do here today is give you a way to differentiate what kind of hydrangea you have, because sometimes you inherit one and you have no idea what it is, which is perfectly reasonable. But unfortunately, different pruning techniques are needed on different hydrangeas. So that's why I always ask that question, well, which hydrangea do you have? So there are 3 basic techniques. Rejuvenation pruning, used only with smooth hydrangea, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It has to be during the dormant season. For all of them, don't remove any more than 25% of the canopy in a season. Some of these species you really should not prune very much of at all, if at all. And in general, only prune during the dormant season. So this is heading back, which is used on most of the hydrangeas. And you can see here we have our plant. This technique is used to make the plant less wide and less tall. And you always cut to an out-facing bud. This bud is facing outwards. The reason for that is that when you make a cut, you're going to stimulate new growth. If you make it to an inward-facing bud, you'll have growth facing back inside to the plant, and that will get all tangled up and not be a good structure. The next pruning technique is thinning, where you remove a third of the biggest, oldest canes right at the base. And you can combine this with heading back cuts to shape the plant. And the last one is rejuvenation. Very severe technique, again, only used with smooth hydrangeas. This is sometimes called the haircut technique too, and you can cut them back to about 4 inches above the ground. All right, now we get into our different species. So we have our first one, which tends to be the one that I get the most questions about, and probably our biggest problem child, so to speak, because it has the issues with the pink and the blue flowers and also with flower bud hardiness. So this plant is hardy to zone 5. However, the flower buds are often only hardy to zone 5B or 6. So if you're in zone 5, if we have a zone 5 winter, you might be okay. But if we have a zone 4 winter, you'll probably just get leaves the next year. Or if we don't have snow, that is something that can happen. I usually recommend for people who are growing this plant, if you possibly can, cover it for a winter, a big bushel basket or something like that to protect the flower buds. That's really a good idea to do that. Now, because the industry noticed that, gee, there are a lot of people that want to grow this, but it only blooms on old wood, and that means the flower buds have to survive the winter, let's do some breeding. And they did find some plants that had what we call remontant bloom, which means that some of the branches will bloom on new wood, but most of them will bloom on old wood. So there was a huge deal in the industry, and this was released, I think, by Bailey's as the Endless Summer series. Our woody ornamental specialist calls this the Endless Bummer series because, unfortunately, many times the remontant characteristic isn't as remontant as we'd like, and you still end up with most blooms on old wood, which may or may not survive the winter. This is a beautiful plant, but it really does best in zone 6. Now, we do have those little pockets of zone 6 around the lakes and at the bottom of the state. So those of you who live there, you may be able to grow this plant a lot better. If you have a protected area in zone 5, you may be just fine. I don't have too much of a problem with mine that is in a protected area. We have some at the teaching garden that bloom fairly regularly, but I do protect mine. Now, again, with the pH, if it's 5.5 or below, maybe even to 6, you'll see either blue or trending into lavender and so on. But if it is more alkaline, you'll get pink flowers. And there's nothing wrong with pink flowers. It's just that lots of times people are looking for the blue. Now, the ones in the photos, these things that you see that are the florets, those are actually sterile. They're actually sepals and not petals. Hydrangeas have some very small fertile flowers that the pollinators use, but these that are bred for these big mop head flowers or corums with sterile florets are not good pollinator plants, just so if you're trying to plant for pollinators that you know that. But there are some big leaf hydrangeas that are lace cap types that do have the fertile flowers, and I'll show you that right here. So this is what this looks like. This is called a lace cap, where it's got this kind of lacy appearing fertile flowers, and you'll see all the pollinators in here, and they're surrounded by kind of a ring of the larger sterile florets. So most of our big leaf hydrangeas are fairly short, generally 2 to 4 feet. There are some that are quite short. And in general, you don't do a whole lot of pruning on them except for removing dead stems using the thinning method in the spring. And usually you can see that the flowers are at the ends of the stems. So if you pruned in early spring to take down the height, you would be taking down your flowers as well. So if you do want to take down height, wait until after it blooms, within a couple weeks of that, but no later than July. So this one here is that endless summer twist and shout. It may be more pink if you have, again, more alkaline soil. Now, unfortunately, Hydrangea macrophylla, big leaf, is very easily mistaken for and very closely related to Hydrangea serrata, the mountain hydrangea. That is a zone 6 plant. We might be able to grow it in some areas in Wisconsin, but it's very unreliable. And unfortunately, sometimes the macrophyllas or the serratas are sold as being macrophyllas. So if you're not familiar with the variety, check on your phone to see that it is in fact a macrophylla. Then we have the climbing hydrangea, Hydrangea anomala. This is a beautiful vine. It is one that roots into the material that it climbs on. So it's not good for, say, chain link fences or trellises because it doesn't climb using tendrils. So it will kind of cement itself to whatever surface it is climbing on. This one does need part shade. The previous one also needs part shade. It will do fine in morning sun. The other variety, the previous one, but does need afternoon shade or can take light shade all day long. Same for this variety. Unfortunately, Japanese beetles really like this plant. So if you have high beetle pressure, I wouldn't recommend this species. It is also very slow to flower. I usually get at least one call a year with somebody saying, I've had mine planted for 5 or 6 years, and why isn't the darn thing flowering? And then we go through various questions to try and figure that out, but sometimes it remains a mystery as to why it's not blooming. I will say that if you have very heavy shade, that this plant may not be the best flowerer. So if you were trying to climb a Norway maple, or if you were trying to put it on a wall on a very dark north side, it may not flower very well. You can prune this with heading back cuts, ideally after it has flowered during the year. There's also a cool variety called Miranda that is variegated, as you can see in the bottom there. That one takes even longer to flower, but it makes up for it by having very cool foliage. Next, we have our oak leaf hydrangea, Hydrangea quercifolia. This is the only one that has these really cool lobed leaves. And this is also the only one that gets pretty awesome fall color. Sometimes it'll be more burgundy, sometimes more coral red, but usually you will get good fall color. Now, unfortunately with this one, it is also zone 5, and sometimes the flower buds are more like zone 5B or possibly even zone 6 hardy for older varieties. The newer varieties do seem to be more hardy, so you might want to check that out. This is actually a plant that is native to the US, but much south of Wisconsin. Now, while in the wild, it can get quite large, and some of the varieties down south do get to be 6 to 8 feet. Usually in Wisconsin, we're going to have it be more like 4 feet tall. And we do have some dwarf varieties that are only going to get to be a couple feet tall as well. This one will take full sun, but I would put it in a slightly protected area, if at all possible, protected from winter wind. And it does like afternoon shade if you're able to provide that. If you do have it in full sun, I would make sure that it's not in a hot, dry area. So like not up against your White House on the south or west side. It also has really interesting stems that have very exfoliating bark. Now you're only going to see that characteristic during the winter and the early spring, but it is interesting. Also, it is almost semi-evergreen. You'll often see the leaves holding on for a long time. And the flowers look fairly similar to the panicle hydrangea. So these are in a kind of elongated panicle. We have munchkin here in our teaching garden. And if you're in Dane County, I do encourage you to come visit us at the Dane County Extension Teaching Garden, and you can observe several different types of hydrangeas here. These are usually going to go from white to pink and then to brown at the end of the season. And oak leaf also blooms on old wood, usually in June. So if you do want to do any shaping types of cuts, do wait until after it blooms, and do prune within a couple weeks of that before it starts initiating flower buds for next year. In general, they don't need a whole lot of pruning and shaping except to remove dead stems and to deadhead the flowers. The beautiful panicle hydrangea is probably the hardiest one that we have in our area. Very easy to grow. And the good news is that, yay, it flowers on new wood. So you don't have to worry about flower buds not surviving the winter. This one is best in full sun, and it can get quite large. I have seen some of the older varieties, at least down here in the southern part of the state, get to be 15 feet, like Pink Diamond or Unique or one of those types. But there are a lot of breeding work going on right now, and they're trying to make them smaller. So a lot of the newer ones that you're going to buy are going to be in the 4 to 6 foot range. And they do even have some dwarf or semi-dwarf versions that also will be quite a bit smaller. Now, the flower panicles on these are absolutely huge. They can be 6 to 15 inches long. Of course, on the dwarf varieties, they're going to be quite a bit more petite, but they bloom later in the season. What this means for you is that you can do pruning in the spring or in the very late fall once they're dormant, and not worry about cutting off any flower buds. And you can see that a lot of these will start out white and then grade into pink like Chantilly lace, or they may eventually turn all pink. Now that may happen much later in the season, though. It might happen not until like late August or so, at least here in the lower part of the state. If you live in the upper reaches in the state, you may never actually hit that pink version if it is one of the ones that takes a while to change. They do have a green blooming one that's very beautiful called Limelight. And Pinky Winky is another example of a white into pink type. This is a very vigorous plant. So you can use thinning and heading back cuts. You can prune fairly severely. You can take it back by half if you need to. I will tell you, if you do that during the dormant season, it will respond very vigorously and grow like crazy. So if you really want to keep it short, wait until just after the leaves finish expanding, until they hit their mature size, and do your pruning then. Then your vigorous grow back will be quite a bit diminished. This is a great plant, by the way, for cut flowers as well. Now, smooth hydrangea is one that people often think of when you say hydrangea. They think of the snowball type hydrangeas. Annabelle is the most common variety that you find, but there are a number of new varieties as well that they're breeding for bigger flower corums and sturdier stems. Breeding has been kind of hit and miss. You will see some gorgeous pictures that may not at all resemble the type of flower that you get. This is another Eastern US native, and usually it's about 3 to 5 feet in height. So these are some of the new ones. I've grown both of these, and Mini Mauvette looks more like kind of a dirty lavender. It kind of like the flowers right here near the base. It's not a very exciting color. And the plant, I bought it because it's very short. So it does achieve that very nicely. But Invincible Spirit has been kind of a disappointment. And depending on where you grow it, and depending on your soil type, soil moisture, how much sun it is, you may have a lot of variety in how big those flower corums get and how deep the color is. So you may find that things don't look like they did in the pictures. This does bloom on new wood, whichever color it is. So this can be cut pretty much to the ground, about 4 inches above the ground with that rejuvenation pruning in the fall if you wish. You don't have to. You could cut it back with heading back cuts and leave half of it up. That's absolutely fine if you want to. And this one, the flower color is not affected by soil pH. So that is the whole gamut of the hydrangeas that we are able to grow fairly reliably in Wisconsin, and I will be happy to take some questions.
Hey, Lisa. We have had a few questions in. One, we just have 2 minutes, so I'm going to go with some the pine needles. We often hear about pine needles, and the question simply is, do pine needles help keep blue hydrangeas blue?
Not much. They just don't provide enough power to change the pH. I would go with sulfur products, either iron sulfate or soil sulfur. The problem with using aluminum sulfate is that aluminum can become toxic at about pH 5 or even 5.5. And that's the pH that you need these plants to be at to produce that blue color. So I just use iron sulfate or soil sulfur.
All right, let's do one more quick one. Is it too late if I go to the nursery and I see some great hydrangeas in their, pots right now? Can I bring them home and plant them?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If you're trying to change your pH, though, to get blue flowers, that's usually going to take about 3 months. So I would still prepare the soil now if you really wanted to plant it this year, but realize that it'll take until next year. Now, usually they have them in pretty acid soil in the lot, so they probably will bloom blue this year. Next year, we'll see how well that works. Do follow directions carefully because you can burn roots with the sulfur products if you over apply. So only apply as much as directed, and be sure and mix it in well.
All right, with that, we are at time for today. We appreciate your feedback on our evaluation survey. Julie has already put that in that link in the chat box, and maybe she can put that in there again. Additionally, as the webinar closes, you will be redirected to our evaluation survey. So we appreciate your feedback. I hope you gained an appreciation for hydrangeas, how they might fit into your landscape, and we hope that you will join us again real soon. You can find a list of all of our upcoming events on the Extension Horticulture website. That's hort.extension.wisc.edu. And another big thank you to Lisa Johnson for that excellent presentation. And thank you all for joining us today. Have a great day, everyone, and see you next time.